Some news just coming in. Ukraine's northern city of Chernihiv is all but cut off as Russian forces continue to destroy bridges and other roads around it. The besieged nation is fighting to hold the city, which Russia wants to seize to bolster its northern advance on Kyiv. Footage captured by British broadcaster Sky News showed cluster bomb shells strewn around across the field, which both Ukraine and Russia have been firing at each other. In the report, the Sky crew attempted to enter Chernihiv by vehicle, and as they do, shelling bombards them. It forces the crew to jump out and duck for cover as the deafening attack surrounds them.
His leg.
We're waiting for some information about.
After attending 3 back-to-back emergency summits in Belgium, US President Biden has landed in Poland to get a first-hand look at efforts to help refugees fleeing the war-torn country. Biden has arrived. Well, after landing, the president met with soldiers from the US Army's 82nd Airborne Division. US soldiers have been stationed there as a part of NATO's protection of the alliance's eastern flank. While addressing the US soldiers, Biden said, "You are in the midst of a fight between democracies and oligarchs." As the Russian-Ukraine war enters day 31, Moscow continues to bomb key Ukrainian cities, including the capital of Kyiv and Kharkiv.
I spent a lot of time in Ukraine when I was a senator and vice president. I've spoken to the Rada in the days when they, in fact, didn't have what you'd call a democracy, and was there in the Maidan when the former leader had to take off and head into Russia. And so, you know, but the Ukrainian people have a lot of backbone. They have a lot of guts, and I'm sure you're observing it. The world ain't going to be the same, not because of Ukraine, but I'm not going to be the same 10, 15 years from now in terms of our organizational structures. And the question is, who's going to prevail? Are democracies going to prevail and the values we share? Or autocracy is going to prevail. And that's really what's at stake. So what you're doing is consequential, really consequential.
We're getting the details of US President Joe Biden's visit to Poland, where he met with US soldiers as well, trying to boost their morale, talking to them, talking about how the war really is between democracies and oligarchs. Also, details of the Russian occupation of Ukraine, at least the attempted occupation, given that 31 days have lapsed ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. Rajesh Pawar is from the capital city of Kyiv, getting us more on that. Kremlin, Rajesh, seems to be shifting its focus away from Kyiv, like you were telling us. Do talk to us a little about the strategy, even as we mark over 31 days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine today.
Look, Sneha, it was like I said 2 days back, it looks like there's a change in Russian tactics. And today they announced that the first phase of their military operations is over. And what appears to me is that now the second phase is about consolidation, consolidating their gains in the north and south of Ukraine, consolidating their hold over the cities which were besieged by them and captured by them, be it Kherson in the south, be it Mariupol, be it Kharkiv, be it Sumy. They'll be consolidating their positions in these cities now, consolidating all their territorial gains. Also, what appears to me is now that they're building up defenses all around Kyiv, on the perimeter of Kyiv, so that if need be, they can repel any kind of counterattack by the Ukraine forces, and at the same time, if need be, they can go inside the Kyiv city for an assault whenever it is needed. Besides this, they'll continue their pressure by airstrikes in the west of Ukraine, be it by missiles or be it by airstrikes. Sneha.
Focus has intensified on Donbas. Just take us through the strategy, essentially, when it comes to this crucial region, Rajesh.
Look, Donbass is comprised of two regions, Lugansk Oblast and Donetsk Oblast. Russia or the Russian-backed militia had about 30% of this land before the invasion started. Now they're in control of almost 95% of this land. And the reports are last night, in last 24 hours, Russian-backed militia has made about 3 to 4 kilometers of gains inside Ukrainian territory in these two oblasts. So what appears to me is they will have complete control of these two oblasts and then will consolidate and build their defenses on the perimeter so that these areas cannot be taken back by the Ukrainians in case Russia decides to withdraw after a settled negotiation or settled agreement. Over to you, Sneha.
You know, Rajesh, there's no confusion when it comes to the kind of devastation vis-a-vis human lives that we've seen. Take us through the details of what does it look like as far as the entire country is concerned, key cities are concerned, because the estimate is that there are refugees who've left, lives have been disrupted. There is a fear of outbreak of infections in several parts in Ukraine is what the WHO also has suggested. These are problems that are going to really surface before all of us in days and weeks to come, essentially. The human cost of this war, the actual impact is yet to be seen, isn't it?
Of course, Sneha, it is very true that every war is a human tragedy, and so is this war. Almost 4 million people now displaced, internally displaced, or have become refugees in nearby countries. And like any other war, it's a common people who are bearing the burden of this war, these clashes between Russian and the Ukrainian forces. But let me also tell you the positive side is this is not like a Syrian crisis, the Syrian refugees or DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo crisis. This is a European country, and UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, has pumped in millions of dollars to make sure that they have good living conditions, the refugees, when they're going, be it in Poland or Hungary or Slovakia or in Moldova. A lot of money has been pumped in, a lot of infrastructure has been created. And yesterday, if you pay attention to what Biden has said, they also have announced a fresh humanitarian aid of $1 billion. I don't think this kind of humanitarian aid has ever been provided in any other conflict in the last few years by America. So it will not be as bad as we have been hearing in the other refugee crisis. But yes, of course, it's a human tragedy. Families have been separated. And yes, people have faced a lot of brutal consequences of this war. Sneha.
Well, Rajesh, thank you so much for getting us up to speed with that. But I wish the same could be said about UNHRC pumping in so much money and aid to other countries also where the conflict continues, in Ethiopia, for example, where the conflict continues. But thanking you for the moment. Be safe. We'll, of course, keep coming back to you for more on that. And we're staying with Ukraine. The focus continues to be on the besieged country. But Ukraine is standing tall and strong in spite of being bloodied and battered. Russian President Putin has switched to a new plan. Russia now vows to liberate Donbass, like Rajesh was just telling us. Its defense military has said that first phase of Ukraine operation was successful. This comes days after Russia had set up a no-fly zone over Ukraine's Donbass. Russians even claim atrocities by Ukrainian government and forces in the region. Early this month, Putin had even said it had been a difficult decision to invade Ukraine. Donbass is crucial. It's backed by separatists now, controlling 93% of Luhansk and 54% of Donetsk. The two areas that actually make up the Donbass region. Gaurav Sawant is in Poland, getting us more details on that story. And Poland is significant, extremely significant. Of course, it's the border country of Ukraine. But also, the US president is there, Gaurav, a full month after the crisis broke out. What really can be expected from this meeting? Because there's a lot of talk about, military support. But what can be expected? At the end of the day, the US president is in Poland, assuring that country as well.
He's assuring Poland that NATO countries will be protected. He is talking about giving them weapons and systems and humanitarian assistance. That's the key leg of his visit. But, the tragedy for Ukraine is the weapons and systems that Ukraine requires, they are not getting. For example, Ukraine's president, when he addressed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, he shot 1,000 missiles, 500 surface-to-air missiles, 500 anti-ship and anti-tank guided missiles every day. 1,000 missiles a day to keep Russia at bay. Will he get it? Remains to be seen. He's asked for declaration of a no-fly zone. the US president stopped short of saying that that's not possible. I mean, he's not getting a no-fly zone either. He's sought 1% of the tanks and the fighter jets that NATO countries have. And he's not getting the fighter jets or the tanks that he requires either. So no offensive weapons are being given, defensive weapons are being given, and that to the lighter ones. He's not getting the S-300 missile defense shield that he seeks, and several NATO member countries and countries in the region have that, but he's not getting that either. As far as the US president is concerned, in a short while from now, he will be addressing Poland, or he'll be addressing democracies, as they say. The address to the democracies is all about standing up to autocrats, oligarchs and war criminals, as he called the Russian president Vladimir Putin. But that's a terminology that the West is using at this point of time. He's also talking about how Poland's done a nice thing with more than 2 million refugees being given shelter, food, medical care, and especially single mothers, because their husbands are still fighting, their little children, they'll get access to school education and healthcare in this country. So there's a lot of pressure on infrastructure even in Poland. How will those pressures be mitigated in terms of financial assistance in case of other international bodies coming into this country and helping out? And very important, Sneha, since you also cover it very closely, healthcare is critical here at this point of time. So is the effort to ensure that women trafficking, child trafficking, human trafficking is a big threat, and all efforts are being made to ensure that people who are either coming into poverty now because they've left their homes and hearths and in many instances all their money behind and fled to this country escaping those bombs, they don't fall in the trap of human traffickers, Sneha.
Yes, absolutely. Gaurav, you rightly mentioned, and it's alarming because the WHO clearly said, and this is rather shocking, that tuberculosis is going to be a threat in Ukraine. There is a potential of a cholera outbreak. Gaurav, there was one in Mariupol in the year 2011 as well. That's a concern. That's the worst hit right now. But talking about a little about Russia's own strategy as well, it does appear that it is scaling back its ambitions in Ukraine. How do you read the current situation? Having said that, in the context of NATO countries meeting and the president, US president himself traveling to Poland in the context of Russia now seeming to scale back its ambitions in Ukraine, Gaurav.
So that's the assessment of the NATO countries and the West, that there is a scaling down of operations or ambitions as far as Russia is concerned. Russia hasn't said that, point one. Point two, Russia continues to bash on regardless. Russia was in control of 30% of Donetsk and Luhansk before the start of this war 30 days ago. They controlled only 30% of Donbass region. Now they control practically the entire Donbass region with Russian tanks rolling into Mariupol. They've taken away a lot of people, according to Ukraine, into that side, and now they're giving them new passports and new documentation. So one part of their aim, as the Russian generals have put it out, one part of their aim has been met. The second part of their aim that they're moving forward towards is either a regime change in Kiev or demilitarization. That aim remains unfulfilled and will continue perhaps to remain unfulfilled as long as West continues to provide military hardware to Ukraine, and that is only going through Poland at this point of time. So it remains to be seen in the days ahead, after the US president's visit, what kind of military hardware is given to Ukraine, what kind of resources are provided to Ukraine to continue this fight. In case there's scaling back of those resources, in case offensive weapons are not given, because Ukraine is now claiming, and that's what President Zelensky insists. He says we are not inferior to NATO armies. He says we've been able not just to stall the Russian advance, but in some instances hit back at their supply lines, indicating the level of professionalism that his army has been able to show here. So he wants higher caliber weapons, offensive weapons, so that he can hit back at the Russians. Now, should NATO fall short of providing those weapons, then it remains to be seen in the second month whether Russia actually scales back or intensifies its operations for its twin objectives of a regime change and denazification, as the Russians call it, or demilitarization of Ukraine. They have severely degraded Ukraine's armed forces. There is no denying that fact, even though Ukraine's army continues to fight back. But as far as their air power is concerned or their sea power is concerned, that's virtually non-existent at this point of time.
Gaurav, thanks for getting us all of those details. Gaurav Sawant with his perspective on that story. We'll, of course, keep going back to Gaurav for more on that as we stay with Russian invasion of Ukraine. Moscow has signaled it is scaling back its ambitions in Ukraine to focus on territory claimed by Russian-backed separatists as Ukrainian forces went on the offensive, recapturing towns on the outskirts of the capital of Kyiv. Here is a detailed report.
Ukrainian forces went on the offense against Russian soldiers on Friday, recapturing towns on the outskirts of the embattled capital, Kyiv. And 1 month after Russia sent a massive invasion force into Ukraine, expecting a rapid victory, Moscow signaled it was scaling back its military ambitions. The Russian Defense Ministry announced the first phase of what Russia calls its special military operation was complete, and that it would focus on completely, quote, liberating eastern Ukraine's Donbas region. Its forces remained bogged down, harried, and ambushed by Ukrainian defenders, and so far unable to claim a single major strategic objective, and now, in some places, may be forced into a retreat. A British intelligence report described, quote, Ukrainian counterattacks and Russian forces falling back on overextended supply lines has allowed Ukraine to reoccupy towns and defensive positions up to 35 kilometers east of Kyiv. One Ukrainian soldier on the front line in Bucha, about 16 miles from the capital, who gave only the name Andrei, said he enlisted immediately after Russia's invasion began a month ago.
I told my wife to grab the children and to hide in the basement, and I went to the drafting station and joined my unit straight away. And the next day, from the army base, we moved to the front line. My wife and children were under occupation for 2 weeks, but then they managed to escape through a humanitarian corridor.
Ukraine's armed forces chief of staff said Russia was still trying to resume offensives to capture the cities of Chernihiv, Sumy, Mariupol, and Kharkiv. Battle lines near Kyiv have been frozen for weeks. Failing to capture any major cities, the Russians have instead been encircling them, laying waste to residential areas and driving around a quarter of Ukraine's 44 million people from their homes. Natalia Stern, a refugee from the southern port city of Odessa, who is currently in Romania, had this to say on Friday.
Support. We need support. We believe in ourselves and believe strongly. Please support us and our children. A huge thanks for you all in advance.
Well, hours after President Putin put his nuclear forces on the state of alert, several Russian submarines capable of carrying 16 ballistic missiles sailed into the North Atlantic. Tracked by Western militaries, the decision to send the submarines closer to European shores was seen by the British Navy chiefs as posturing and a warning rather than an actual threat. They returned towards Russia shortly after, and normal levels of activity resumed. Since then, Western intelligence agencies have kept a closer eye on Kremlin's nuclear arsenal, while Russia's use of strategic nuclear weapons of the sort carried by the submarines is still being viewed by most observers as unthinkable. Some analysts envisage a scenario in which shorter-range, lower-yield tactical nuclear. This is not the first time that Putin has hinted at using nuclear power. After the Russian troops invaded Ukraine, Putin on the 20th of February had said that Russia's nuclear forces are on high alert. Russian troops had also attacked premises of Zaporizhzhia, and also attempts are made to capture Chernobyl power plant.